Hello everyone, my name is Shraddha. I'm the founder of Confluence Consultants based in Dubai. About 3 weeks back, I had a friend reach out to me telling me that she wasn't able to sleep the entire night thinking about what's going to happen between Iran and Israel. She actually imagined somebody entering her house in a war zone. And I think that's something that we've all been collateral damage of the social media reporting, self-styled experts, and every prediction is a doomsday. It's much easier to believe that the world is going to end in an Armageddon than actually sit through what is happening in the world, make sense of the trends, and do very objective analysis. So, what we thought we'll do today is take a Geopolitics 101 with Confluence Masterclass. So, instead of giving you our sort of scenarios or hypotheses, why we believe certain things, we thought we'd take you through the entire process through which I and the team we arrive at our geopolitical predictions, right? So my team has also been inquiring, asking about a lot of things about the Middle East, how the global geopolitics is panning out. So today I'm going to invite Amandeep to please take the stage with me, and this is your chance to ask whatever you want to Amandeep.
Thank you so much for hosting this masterclass, Shraddha. And just
Pleasure.
like your friend, my own mother also had that one sleepless night when Iranian missiles.
I think we all did.
Yeah, Iranian missiles permeated through Doha airspace, and then suddenly everybody in Dubai was just panicking. So great time for a masterclass. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So let's start with the entire process. Let's make the audience aware of how we think through things. And do you want to structure this anyway, or should we just go directly into how the process works?
I think a lot of the times when we receive queries, and as you know, we internally also develop the thought process around how geopolitical scenarios are gained. Some of the questions are about the foundation of our theories.
Okay.
So I think maybe we can start just a little bit on what is actually the first step. So maybe we can map out some initial thought processes, and let's start with that.
Do you want to do the honors?
I will do the honors.
So let's go. So every time we begin with geopolitical analysis, we take a lot from the economic game theory, right? The prisoner's dilemma, the famous prisoner's dilemma. What we do is we take it from economics and bring it to the realm of politics by using really the entire architecture of the game theory. So the first thing we look at is actors, right? So that's the most important thing, to identify actors. The second step typically involves, giving motivation to these actors. So what are these actors aiming to achieve in the entire geopolitical scenario? The third one essentially is we identify strengths to these actors. How much power do they have to actually, implement what they really want to do? So motivations would be our next head. I'm sorry, my handwriting is really bad, so I'm letting her take. And then the last one essentially is we look at a scenario when all of them are trying to implement their motivations, and a sort of a case of competition, collaboration, and confrontation emerges. And from that, we build the scenarios. And then there is a last associated element with game theory, which is called TINA. TINA is essentially there is no alternative. So maybe we could put that here as well. Great. So Amandeep, does that make sense? What are these things here?
Confrontation, competition, collaboration.
Awesome. Okay. So does this make sense to you?
I think it does make sense. I think it gives us a sort of a clean slate to start with, and we can start mapping these out and then come up with our own little scenarios.
So should we do a little bit of example? Should we try and game the Middle East?
Yeah, the one that's been keeping us up at night. Let's do it.
Again, a very, very complicated region with like years of geopolitical history, but let's try and break it down to a point where we can give you some pointers to think about. So let's start with the actors. So Amandeep, who do you think are the main actors impacting geopolitics in the region? And you can be as macro or as deep dive as you want to.
So of course, given the latest conflict, I would start with Israel as one of the actors.
Israel. And within Israel, you've got the hardline faction, which is Prime Minister Netanyahu and his coterie, and then you've got protests happening. So there are also moderates, etc. So Israel, perfect. What is next?
Iran, the opponent.
Absolutely. And maybe then we can just write Iran, because otherwise Iran again is divided into, right wing, the supreme leader, moderate factions, and all of that implemented in very different ways. What's next?
We've got the GCC states that are primarily focused on economic diversification, progress.
Yeah, that we'll come to in the motivations. Let's UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia primarily. They are the ones with the most influence in the region. Who else?
We've got the US.
Yes, please. Of course. How can you forget the US? And
we've got China, Russia to a certain extent.
China, Russia, absolutely.
We've got also, if we're going outside that traditional area, we've also got Turkey to a certain
absolutely.
extent. And I would also go into the Levant region, so recently stabilized Lebanon, Syria, also a bit of a hand to play there. I'm just going to go in here.
Yeah, just put the Levant region.
Yeah.
That's okay. Anybody else? I think these are good to start with.
Yeah.
Okay, now that we've arrived at the actors, let's begin work on motivations. So, Amandeep, what do you think the main motivations in Israel? And don't think of Israel as a generalized entity. You can think of it in different parts as well. What do you think is motivating Israel the most?
Well, the one that we've heard the most on the media through officials is Israel would like to secure its borders against the existential threat posed by Iran. So long-term security, we've also seen the Coalition for Security come up, where they've got this billboard with photos of leaders
let's put long-term security.
Yeah. Handpicked leaders for the long-term security.
Long-term security. Basically forwarding their US alliance, looking at the US motives in the region. Of course, Netanyahu is a separate actor in here because he's got his own motivations of staying in power, keeping the conflict prolonged, etc. What about Iran?
Becoming the regional hegemon, furthering the sort of its sect of Islam, and so kind of holding that together.
I think I would differ a bit here in the way that geopolitics has evolved in the last 3 years. Iran is, according to me, looking to do two things. First, it's trying to protect itself while its proxies give way. But it's also, in a way, trying to signal to the world that it's ready to get back to the fold. The way that it's not retaliated at all to the things that have happened. So Iran, I think...
self-preservation more now.
Self-preservation, absolutely. Yeah. Self-preservation is a good word. Yeah. So self-preservation. The US, I think, is one of the trickiest to figure out what they're trying to do in the region. Amandeep, what do you think?
Well, again, with the US, like you said, Netanyahu is a completely different actor. In the US, I think President Trump is a different actor because his agenda is expansion of the Abraham Accords, eventual Nobel Peace Prize. That could be one kind of, one factor influencing whatever he does. For the US overall, of course, having Israel in the Middle East as its own sort of proxy to ensure that US interests are protected. So I think, again, self-preservation could be one for the US.
I think there are two schools of thought here which have expounded on what the US is trying to do. The first essentially is that in its existential threat with China, it is trying to create a region where US and its allies play the key role and the allies of Chinese are weakened. So in this case, Iran. So if you see what's happened since October 2023, the region has moved in such a way that most of the new countries, Lebanon, Syria, etc., now have powers that have been led by the US and the GCC, right? So that's one of the things that the US may be trying to do. The second school of thought basically is saying that, with the GCC having so much money, sovereign wealth funds, trying to stabilize the region, they have negotiated an exit for the US, which basically says, just figure out what you have to do, get your sort of act together, weaken Israel, weaken Iran, and move out, right? So that could be one thing that we'll discuss in scenarios.
Yeah.
China, Russia have been very eerily quiet since the Syrian revolution removed Bashar al-Assad. What do you think they're doing?
I think, the eerie silence is a little bit, it's a bit suspicious. I think China and Russia are probably on their own missions of whatever domestic turmoil is going on. Of course, Russia is in its own conflict against Ukraine. China has been all over the news about, the absence of the president from key summits, which really does tell us a lot about, exactly. So, domestic turmoil in there, domestic economic issues, being in the middle of the tech and trade war with the US. So does it really have it in it to play such a key part in the Middle East?
Again, two schools of thought. One is exactly what you're saying. The other one is, remember China brokered the Iran-Saudi rapprochement before all of this happened. and the entire region is now moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
Right. So we are seeing increasing overtures towards Iran. Of course, a lot of hardliners have been taken out. So there is really no opposition coming if the Ayatollah tomorrow decides to, just normalize with everybody, etc. So we've seen, instead of the Abraham Accords that Trump started, we increasingly see the Chinese way working.
Yeah.
So was this China behind the scenes using its power? Again, that's something we'll discuss in the scenarios. Russia probably, yes, is involved in its own conflict, and it's anyway playing a brother to China these days. So we'll discuss some of this in the scenarios. What about Turkey? Turkey is an interesting player. Yeah, it's a new player in the region. It's not really looked at this part of the world because it's been very Europe centric. Now Erdogan is increasingly positioning himself. Syria, for example, can't work without Turkey. So what do you think Turkey's motivations are?
I think in the media, there's been a lot of Turkish president condemning the strikes that Israel has done against Gaza and Iran as well. So it's been very much pro-Iran, pro-Palestine in its stance. But what I also see is that it is trying to create that sort of regional peace because it would like to progress as a key diplomatic power, key economic power behind the scenes. And this is something we've covered in Confluence research as well, is that a lot of its economic agenda items are being now achieved. So they are on the path for progress. So I don't think they are necessarily positioning themselves as disruptors.
I think they're the spoiler in this entire domain. I mean, I can figure out how the Middle East is going to look like in a couple of years, but Turkey is something that we'll have to look very closely. But I think they are increasingly seeing this as an opportunity to sandwich themselves in a region which they've not looked at in years.
Yeah.
Right. So perfect. I think we've covered Israel, we've covered Iran, US, China, Russia, Levant. Of course, the developments in Lebanon, Syria, etc., are largely contingent on the larger regional developments. But there seems to be that the ex-Iranian proxies have either been taken out or they've become whitewashed into getting into the power structure, right?
Yeah.
So that's been very interesting. I mean, Yemen, I think, remains an outlier, but you've seen increasing strikes against Yemen. So probably we're seeing the weakening of the Houthis, but proxies have now no place in this entire setup. However this develops, the proxies are out.
Yeah. That's actually, that's why I had mentioned that coalition for regional security. I thought that was very, very interesting because Israel, in Tel Aviv, the billboard had kind of handpicked the leaders that they perceived to be their partners in long-term security. So, Palestinian liberation organizations, Mahmoud Abbas was in it. So we know that there is possibility. This week, we are, at the time of recording.
We actually missed Palestine.
Levant?
No, Palestine has to be
Palestine has to be a separate
because
one,
it all started from them.
Yes. So I think in that long-term security perspective, they are thinking of a separate leader. Do you
think we're finally going to get a Palestinian state?
I know that we can only say inshallah at this stage, but I really hope that we do. I think it's been a little bit more optimistic than before. I think Iran is a little bit more subdued. Proxies, like you said, have been taken out. So it seems like we are heading there, and I don't think Israeli expansion is going to be universally accepted or even accepted by the US.
Perfect. So let's then build our scenarios. Okay, so let's come to now the strength of each of these actors, right? Again, this is my perspective, and you can add on. I think the most power, as one of my geopolitical mentors told me, is not only about military and security. The power comes from economics, it comes from logistics, it comes from supply chain, and we used a very interesting a sort of a play of words in one of the posts that we did, which said that the GCC has become the energy capital and the capital energy, right? So they've got both the energy and the capital and the future tech and financial services. Anyway, so GCC, I think, is one of the most prominent actors in this entire scenario, right? Their aim is that, put very crudely, you can't have missiles flying while you're trying to build AI cities, future tech, Bitcoin and blockchain and crypto, and you want to be the center of the new world that's emerging in terms of currency and financials. So I have a feeling a lot of what is going on is orchestrated and, in part planned by the GCC. We've seen increasing regional dependence that the GCC is creating from Egypt to Syria to Lebanon. They are now bailing out. So they're basically taking out the IMF loans, right? So Egypt owns so much to the IMF. They've paid up some of the loans, and now Egypt is now getting increasing. So they're trying to create their own dependencies, which does not depend on the global sort of financial institutions, which then take a pound of flesh. US, of course, remains one of the key players in all of this. I think we'll have to see the next steps to really figure out what the US play is. There's a very interesting hypothesis that's emerging that there is a conflict of interest or struggle happening between some of the major vested interests in the US, what we call the deep state. So the military-industrial complex is slowly being edged out by the banks and the financial institutions, which are now looking to, take a destroyed Palestine, take a destroyed Lebanon, take a destroyed Syria, and really build um, reconstruction projects, take over assets. So is that what was the aim all along, or did it change on the way? So US remains a sort of a major
So
player.
just to add there, if financial institutions are going to be taking over the reconstruction efforts over here, maybe defense industries in the US will be redirected somewhere else, as we may see in other scenarios.
We're already seeing it in Europe,
yes,
but we're seeing it increasingly in Asia as well. Israel, I mean, I thought for the longest time that Israel had drawn blood, so it is now going to emerge as one of the major powers. But increasingly, it feels like that the game is to weaken both Israel and Iran, and something has to be done about Palestine because the instability begins from here, and that's the basis on which Iran built its proxies, and Israel sort of had its rationale as well. So. Israel, I don't think will be able to carry on its aggression very soon. The entire narrative that's been built around, Netanyahu, he's now an international criminal. Everywhere he goes, he's probably just probably his last legs.
I think internally as well, because of the delay in bringing the hostages back, there has been a level of public outcry as well. Of course, a lot of it was fixed when the public started perceiving an Israeli victory over Iran. But as long as the hostages are being delayed from coming back into Israeli territory, I think that level of popularity.
That's been on, right? He's had protests against him for years.
Yeah, and the corruption trial, of course, doesn't help.
Absolutely. Iran is an interesting beast here because, I get the sense with the US and the Israeli strikes. Again, we've all waited years to see how an Iran-Israel battle will turn out. It's given sleepless nights to many, but when it actually panned out, it looked just very staged. So B-52 bombers flew from the US to the Iranian site absolutely undetected, when your nuclear sites are your most protected treasure at the moment. Right, so something is staged. The people who are being taken out on both sides, on Israeli and Iranian sides, are all hardliners, which are opposed to any kind of change in status quo. I won't be surprised if Iran returns back to the table for a sort of a nuclear negotiations. Their proxies are out, and I think they're okay with it. They've not come to the aid of any proxies. So I think it's a changed Iran and a changed Israel and a changed GCC as well.
I agree with that. And just on Iran as well, I feel like we don't, and I don't know how effective this is going to be, but I feel like we need to talk more about the fact that the president's campaign was based on economic progress and fixing ties with the West. And so if he can make that work, then this would really be changed Iran for the Middle East.
Yeah. Perfect. So should we then build, so let's see, collaboration, confrontation, competition, right? I personally feel, and we'll see in a couple of months, that the Middle East for the first time in many years is moving towards collaboration.
Yeah.
Right. So it's moving towards a region where I think it's emerging. So Asia was the center of manufacturing and therefore economic activity for years. The center of economic activity is shifting to this part of the world. Why do I say that? Because this is the only place where future tech can be built. And that's really the future of the global economy. So we've seen every American tech giant, investing here in some capacity or the other. Some technologies are become very indigenous to this part of the world. So blockchain, right? Blockchain and crypto and Bitcoin, which is really going to be the future of fiat currency, a currency as we say. I think they've got the money.
They have the money.
There's no one in the world that has the kind of money that these guys do. So I think it's moving towards collaboration. Certain elements will have to be put in place for that piece to be achieved. I think we've been moving in that direction. And so it's going to be collaboration with some bit of competition remaining between Israel and Iran. I personally feel that this is probably the most ripe moment for a Palestinian state. If it was ever to happen, it will happen now.
Yeah.
So let's then build the scenarios. Do you want to remove these three beautiful C's? Again, so we've built three scenarios here, and we're not going to tell you right now which one we give the highest probability. That's something you'll have to reach out to us individually. I think the first scenario is going to be that we assume that the US is in the driving seat, right? It's the global geopolitics and their conflict with China that's driving what's happening in the Middle East. In that scenario, the US basically started from Russia, Ukraine. It weakened Russia via Ukraine. They moved to the Middle East. They started this entire conflict. It was all aimed at weakening Iran, taking away the proxies. Of course, GCC was a part of the entire plan as well because they need peace in the region.
Allies.
Allies, absolutely. So in this scenario, Israel should emerge as the most powerful actor in the Middle East, right? So single-handedly taken out Hezbollah. It took them a week to take out Hezbollah. I mean, something. So I've been hearing that Hezbollah has massive amounts of missiles and all of that for better part of my geopolitical life. And when it push came to shove, it took a week for the entire leadership to collapse. I mean,
Yeah.
something is just not right. So in this scenario, Israel becomes very, very powerful, which again is not good for the stability of the region, right? For years, Iran and Israel have stabilized each other. They've created a status quo where you knew your red lines, right? But that status quo itself had become untenable because of the rise of the GCC.
Yeah.
So this scenario, I feel if this is what is playing out, then we're going to see more of the escalation. So not an Iran-Israel war. I don't think that's going to happen. But we're going to continue seeing this tit for tat escalation, and you'll see instability in Lebanon, in Syria, Yemen, etc. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario essentially is if you assume that the US and GCC are in the driving state. So the GCC is calling the shot in terms of taking over the regional construction. They're providing aid to Syria, to Lebanon, to Egypt, and really telling the global powers that, hey, this is our region, we can take care of it, and sort of please move out. This particular scenario requires a weakened Israel and a weakened Iran. Both of them have to be weakened, right? So we've seen a lot of weakening in terms of Iran. We've seen weakening in terms of Israel. The next few months will give us an indication of if this scenario is playing out. Then you will see Iran come back to the nuclear table. The proxies will be done with. I think Houthis is a question that still has to be sorted out. So I guess we'll see increasing strikes or Houthis coming to a compromise. With Israel, I suspect that the cabinet is going to come in for reckoning. Netanyahu is going to come in for reckoning. He's probably going rogue because he is just getting the maximum gains from the military-industrial complex and making sure that he gets an exit. Let's see if the International Court of Justice catches him, but I'm very sure he's not becoming the prime minister again, if we believe this scenario, right? The third one, again, nobody, the events don't really play out to it because China has been very eerily quiet. But there's also a school of thought which is saying that this is the true beginning of a multipolar world. The US and Israel tried to do their things in the region, but they were pushed back. Even Jordan and Egypt, for example, they refused to take the Palestinian sort of refugees.
Yeah.
They put a very red line that you cancel the IMF loan, we don't care.
Yeah.
The three states, obviously Saudi Arabia, etc., have also been very, very clear about all of these things. But it's said that they had the support of not only China but Russia, India, not so much India. But that's the scenario that's being played out. That this is a multipolar world pushing back against what they see as US aggression.
Yeah.
So if this is the case, that it's a GCC China multipolar led thing, then I guess after years we can move from a forever war to a forever peace scenario in the Middle East. Though I am really not that optimistic because once everything is sorted out, we still have unanswered questions. What is Turkey going to do, for example? What would Iran hardline regime that's ruled for years, if they're pushed out by moderates, for example, have they become more powerful? Have the moderates become more powerful? Those kind of questions will have to be answered. But if this is the scenario, then this probably is the most positive for the region, and we'll have to see. I think some events we should closely watch to be able to see which scenarios are playing out is what happens to Netanyahu and the cabinet, what happens with the Iranian nuclear deal. We already, we keep hearing not so prominent, but news that China is sending, advanced weaponry to Iran. Russia is helping Iran its own way. All of the regional states are doing overtures, etc. So I think what's happening in Iran will need to be closely watched. What's happening in Israel will need to be closely watched. And if we assume that the region is moving towards some sort of stabilization, then what is going to happen once the US forces withdraw? Right? When US sort of gets out of the region and says, okay, here, manage it yourself. So then there's Turkey, etc. So I think these are some of the events we'll have to watch closely. Palestinian state, any negotiations towards that will be a sure shot of indicator of who's calling the shots. So yes, now I will leave you. I know I said a lot. So any questions you have, you were looking very disbelievingly at me when I said the third scenario. So why don't you shoot the questions?
I think I have more thoughts about these scenarios than questions. I think the US and GCC. When we were talking also about the motivations and the actors, I think the US and GCC have pretty much similar power. because where the US has sort of historical power, the GCC has the dollar power and the energy power. So I think they are equally calling the shots. But of course, how that plays out in each of these scenarios is going to be very, very interesting. I have a few questions now. I just want to ask you, how controversial can I go with these questions?
As controversial, if I have answers, if I want to give them, I'll give them. Otherwise, I'll deflect them.
Okay, so let's start with the most controversial one,
Yeah.
so that I know how low or high the bar can be. Iran. When we're talking about the future of Iran, and if it's going to be more hardline, if it's going to be more Western oriented. I recently, on the Middle East Vogue cover, saw the photo of the granddaughter of the Shah of Iran, who was, of course,
no, there's no regime change happening.
There's no regime change.
No,
okay.
That's a non-starter.
Okay.
Even if regime change, Reza Shah Pahlavi's dynasty is not coming back. They're extremely unpopular in Iran.
Okay, so that's my most controversial question answered.
There you go.
Great. I think the US being in the driver's seat, the question that I have over here is, Israel emerging as the most powerful, and then what happens next? What does that order look like? Israel remains the most powerful, then the GCC is not going to stay quiet, of course. And then, Saudi, for example, the reason that Abraham Accords haven't happened yet is because Saudi is holding out on the hope that they can maybe use this as leverage to create a Palestinian state. So what does this order really look like in your mind?
So this is going to be the most destabilizing order in the long term, right? Yeah. So for now, it seems, at least when you look at the Middle East, it seems like Israel has basically conquered all its enemies, right? Yeah. So you have a new General Aoun government in Lebanon, which does not include the Hezbollah. And General Aoun is a person who's led the armed forces in Lebanon, and he's been very anti-Hezbollah. It's also a government that's been brokered by the Saudis, the French, the GCC again. So GCC has a hand in pretty much everything. Yeah. It's pretty much the same with Syria.
Equal power.
Yeah, so it's also that. But what will happen is, if, for example, if this is what we're looking at, then at some point of time, the US will withdraw from the region to take on China in the Indo-Pacific. At that time, you have an Israel that's tasted blood. You have an Iran whose final solution has not been delivered. You have a Turkey without which Syria and all this region cannot be stabilized. And these three powers colliding with each other is going to be a tug of war. So the rope that has existed for so many years has given way, and now you have new actors, new powers, new red lines, which probably is the most, in the long term, the most destabilizing scenario.
I think just in the interest of time, I know this has been a very long video, I will just put in one question.
Sure.
So these two scenarios, I feel like they can have a bit of a combination. So we've got the US and GCC, like I said, in my opinion, they have equal power. But I also believe that there is a bit of a multipolarity in the order. So, we've spoken about Turkey and Egypt.
Yeah.
Both of them want to rise as diplomatic powers. Both of them want to rise as economic powers. Turkey is going big on mobility. Egypt is going big on fintech, real estate, and all of that. So we know that there's pockets of power emerging everywhere. So do you feel that there's a combination of these two scenarios that can be achieved, where the US and GCC are both driving negotiations? The US leaves the region, GCC becomes the new powerhouse, Israel-Iran weakened, but also there's still power everywhere.
So
that sounds like very idealistic kind of scenario.
So I'll be very honest, both of these have very different implications, right? This assumes that US is still the sole superpower, right? So GCC is a regional power, they've got the dollar power, but US is still the superpower in the true sense military.
This is sort of like ancillary power.
Even if it's so, the GCC cannot replace the US in that sense, right? The US remains a superpower. This scenario assumes that the US power has been sufficiently weakened for China and the allied states to call the shot.
Right.
So that's a very different world.
Yeah.
Right. So again, I'm going to tell you which one I believe more in, but we can always do like a follow-up if people are interested. But these two have very, very different connotations for the global macro order. Right. So therefore, we have to see the events in the next maybe couple of months, and then I think we'll be able to get to where the world is going.
Yeah. Well, at the time of recording, it seems like at the end of this week, we will hear about what happens with the negotiations between Hamas and Israel. Of course, there have been multiple rounds of this negotiation.
It's a longer-term process.
We're
not going to see anything right this week, but do
we'll
look at the events.
We'll see signs of what is to come. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shraddha, for this masterclass. I feel enlightened.
It's my pleasure. And any questions that the audience has, if you disagree with us, if you're looking at some other scenario that we haven't been able to cover, please do reach out.
Or if you have any ideas on what you would like us to film, that would be helpful as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.